Stand up.
Hello, I am here. You are here. It is Thursday, the 11th of July. That means we will have a hangout. I will be hosting a hangout tonight for all paid subscribers. Be there because there's going to be plenty to talk about. The president's got a press conference tonight, which might overlap or be during the same time. I'll be there with you before and after that. Join us, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Looking forward to seeing you tonight at 8 East or earlier. Look for the email from me to tell you what time with the link in it. Really happy I've got a great guest joining me today, as I always do. It's the author of Unholy, How White Christian Nationalists Powered the Trump Presidency and the Devastating Legacy They Left Behind. Sarah Posner returns to the show. She's an investigative reporter, journalist, author, and we have a great conversation, and that is coming up at 18 minutes into today's show. But before I get to the headlines, I just want to read an email from longtime listener Mary Marsh, and it's meant so much to me to hear from you yesterday, Mary. Just the right time. Such a kind and thoughtful thing. The subject was podcast, and Mary writes, every once in a while, I just want to check in and tell you how much I appreciate you and the show. I appreciate the daily email. I read the entire thing. I appreciate so much your daily news feed and your outlook and your opinion. And then I also appreciate the connections you have to people and the amazing interviews that you do. I'm a bumblebee. I listen to every episode to the very end. That's what I call people who listen to the episodes to the very end. That's a secret between us and them that I just let out. So if you want to be one, listen to the end of the show. She writes, life is so stressful right now. I can't believe we're having to go through this Trump shit again. But when I listen to your podcast, it calms me down because I know that there are people out there like me. I am also very appreciative that you're making accessible the hangouts for those of us who can't stay up for them. So thank you again, Mary. Oh, thank you. What a wonderful email you sent me. It meant so much to me, and I think you really captured what we're trying to do here every day. I have great access to these amazing people that I bring each and every day, and we're connecting with each other and reminding each other that here on Earth One, we're not crazy. We see what's happening. We're going to stay connected. We're going to hopefully continue to build this community or keep this community any way we can. But of course, I can't do it without subscribers like Mary. So please sign up now, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Man, I think that was a second plug, and it was a really gratuitous one after reading that very thoughtful email. But yeah. Wow. Awesome. Mary, thank you. Now let me get to your headlines because obviously the situation with the president of the United States, Joe Biden, is kind of unfolding hour to hour. And I'm just so sensitive to everybody's feelings around this. The feelings are so raw. I think I got into it just a little bit with somebody who I've known and loved for a long time on Twitter yesterday. And I think we're all just really terrified about what could happen, what is happening, and the different ways this can all unfold. And the only opinion that I really have is that nobody knows, and that if Joe Biden stays in and is the nominee, that he could win or lose. And if he doesn't, he could win or lose. And I think that is a sad state of affairs, given the fact that his opponent is just the worst person in the world. And we know who he is and what he has done. And I feel like that's a hard thing just as an American to look around and be like, really? There's that many of you that think that this guy should be anywhere near any kind of leadership role, much less children and women? I mean, any kind of power and not in jail and kept away from all other living things? Really? There's that many? And that's hard. That is hard. I'm there with you on that still. So in terms of the situation around the president, I think it's hour to hour, and it's going to unfold a lot more tonight at the press conference that he's going to have with reporters. And then I think we'll know more in a couple of days. I think that some people might have been holding on to what they really believed because they didn't want to say anything during this important NATO summit or usurp him before this press conference. But we'll see how he performs tonight at the press conference, and that could sway opinions a lot. But no matter what you think, I'm not trying to tell anybody about how to think about this. And I think that we really know so little about the the procedural issues. And I read a Wall Street Journal article yesterday that said that he has to be the nominee to give his $100 million war chest away. He can't give it to Kamala Harris or anyone else if he's not the nominee. And I don't know about those FEC rules or if that Wall Street Journal article is right. But Republicans are going to do everything they can in every state to make it hard to get anybody else's name on the ballot. It's a shit show. We're out in the wilderness, and I am right here with you. I'm scared. I'm nervous. I want to keep connecting with people, and I definitely don't want to get mad or have anybody get upset with me over any of this. If you need to tune out, if you want to sound off, if you want to disagree with me, I'm there with you. Like I said, I don't have too many really hard and fast opinions. I am just watching this and I'm along for the ride. And yeah, I made a point yesterday. I was like, why do I care what George Clooney thinks? Where is Matt Damon and Brad Pitt? That's who I really care about, because George Clooney, of course, wrote an op-ed yesterday calling for President Biden to step down. And a couple of people I respect made good points by saying, listen, the guy helped raise $30 million for Joe Biden. If anybody's voice should be heard, it should be somebody who has volunteered or given a lot of money or done anything like that. So I thought that was a fair point. Well, I thought my joke was pretty good too, though. Anyway, let's get to the rest of the headlines, most of which are not going to be related to the presidential campaign or the president's status that is developing. And there's a lot more that's important to cover and is being undercovered. So let's start with the weather. Still really hot across the country. In Texas, more than 1.6 million customers are still without power since up to yesterday afternoon, depriving many of air conditioning during a dangerous heat wave 48 hours after Hurricane Beryl made landfall on the Gulf Coast. On a related note, seems like a very odd angle to the broader story, writes Steve Bannon at Maddow blog. President Joe Biden said Tuesday that the federal government could not distribute emergency relief supplies, including power generators, after Hurricane Beryl hit Texas until the White House was able to, quote, track down state leaders and get their formal request for a major disaster declaration. Biden's comments came after the lieutenant governor there, Dan Patrick, is serving as acting governor while Greg Abbott is on an economic development trip in Asia. Why is the governor of Texas in Asia during this horrible disaster that he saw coming? Well, he's a terrible person. That's one reason. Doesn't care about the people of Texas, much less anybody but himself. Speaking of the White House, these were some compelling remarks from the president yesterday, who said, with the eyes of the world on him, President Joe Biden delivered a forceful speech to open the NATO summit in Washington, aiming to reverse doubts about his fitness for the job domestically, while boasting that his leadership revitalized the storied alliance and saved Ukraine. And speaking of NATO's future, Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, U.S. and European officials said yesterday, advancing assurances from allies that it will be allowed to join the Western military coalition after its war with Russia ends. But when is that? Well, in Russia, a court ordered the arrest of the widow of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny during a hearing Tuesday that was conducted in absentia as part of a sweeping Kremlin crackdown on the opposition. Yulia Navalnaya, who lives abroad, would face arrest if and when she returns to Russia. So I hope she doesn't go back like her husband did. That's my opinion. I don't think she's listening to me. A legislative effort worth watching I wanted to mention is a bipartisan group of senators announced a deal Wednesday on congressional stock trading ban aimed at preventing members from profiting from insider knowledge. That's Steve Bannon again reporting. Really interesting stuff on that story yesterday, because you had Senators John Ossoff and Josh Hawley on stage together, Republican and Democrat, as well as others, to ban stock trading, which, yeah, I think that should be a pretty common sense thing to do. And I'm glad they're doing something. All right, let's go to the Middle East, where the Israeli military dropped leaflets in Gaza City urging Palestinians there to evacuate to the south. Oh, it's happening again. It's just terrible, just terrible. It seems never ending, this horrible siege from the Israelis into Gaza, again, Gaza City. Let's go to some justice, where investor Bill Hwang, whose Archegos capital collapsed in 2021, was found guilty of fraud and faces decades in prison. That's good when a billionaire finds justice and goes to jail. See, it does happen sometimes. In health news, doctors have found success using AI chatbots to file prior authorization claims and appeal insurance denials. Oh, okay. I guess that's an interesting thing worth exploring. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a group of House progressives introduced articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito over their failure to disclose gifts they have received while serving on the court. Not sure that's going to go anywhere, but it's worth doing. And in the Senate, Sheldon Whitehouse and Senator Ron Wyden, have asked the Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor to look into the corruption of Clarence Thomas. So those are big stories from yesterday as well. And those are your headlines as I see them for you. Couple sound bites for you today, and here's the president opening the NATO summit yesterday in Washington. The summit meant to convey confidence in the newly expanded alliance, opening with a dazzling celebration and no mention of the president's political peril here at home is what the reporting is over at the New York Times, but you hate them probably, right? Well, here it is. President sounding pretty good yesterday.
The American people know that all the progress we've made in the past 75 years has happened behind the shield of NATO. Here at this summit, we gather to proclaim NATO is ready and able to secure that vision today and well into the future.
Well, he sounds strong. He's got a lot of timbre in his voice. Sounded really good right there. But the point is, we shouldn't be talking about it. And the fact that anybody is thinking about it or hoping that he doesn't have a slip up, I mean, that's a distraction, and we need to be fully focused on the disaster that he is going up against. But here he is, more from President Biden yesterday's NATO summit.
For 75 years, our nations have grown and prospered behind the NATO shield. Today, we're stronger than we've ever been. Since I took office, we've doubled the number of battle groups in NATO's eastern flank, and the United States has. Finland and Sweden have joined the alliance, and the number of allies spending at least 2% on defense has gone from 9 to 23. That's not happened by chance, but by choice.
All right. There you go. President Biden yesterday sounding good at the NATO summit. Now let's move on to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here she is on the House floor yesterday introducing articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce articles of impeachment against Associate Justices of the Supreme Court Clarence Thomas and Samuel Anthony Alito, Jr. Against Justice Thomas, the resolution includes 3 total articles. 1 count of failure to disclose financial income, gifts, reimbursements, property interest liabilities, and transactions, among other information. And 2 counts of refusal to recuse from matters concerning his spouse's legal and financial interests before the court. The second resolution includes the following impeachment articles against Justice Alito. 1 count of refusal to recuse from cases in which he had a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party before the court, and 1 count of failure to disclose financial incomes, gifts, reimbursements, property interests, among other information.
Here is the minority leader. This is the leading Democrat in the House. It's Hakeem Jeffries on the House floor yesterday.
Why won't you just take your issues to the American people? Why are you trying to hide your plans that are connected to Trump's Project 2025 publicly, but then you come to the House floor and you bring this extreme MAGA Republican voter suppression bill that is part of the blueprint of Trump's Project 2025. You can't fool the American people. They're smarter than you think.
Yes, he's talking about this ridiculous voter suppression bill that was brought to the House floor yesterday. And now I want to give you a little dust up between Jamie Raskin and James Comer yesterday at a House hearing.
That scientists like Dr. Fauci are trying to invent diseases. That's where the cultists come in. Secondly, a number of our colleagues wanted to lecture you, Administrator Regan, about the role of agencies, which are, of course, indispensable in implementing the will of Congress. That's why Congress set up the EPA. That's why Congress set up the National Labor Relations Board. That's why Congress set up the Department of Justice. And our colleagues have no problem using those agencies to get the things done they want to do. If you read their Project 2025, they want the President of the United States to be able to use the Department of Justice for the first time in American history to go after his political opponents. And to well, if you disagree with that, then I'm delighted to hear it, Mr. Chairman.
Which Department of Justice going after political opponents? The Merrick Garland Department of Justice or the
Well, let's
next
see.
Department?
There's a case right now against the Democratic senator from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez. There's a case right now against a Democratic congressman from Texas.
I see a pattern with Democrats.
And well, wait a second. No, don't be too clever. You're a smart man, but try to follow a principled argument. You just claimed that the Department of Justice was somehow biased against Republicans, and I'm naming you cases where the DOJ is going after Democrats. Your problem is the jury system in New York, which found unanimously that Donald Trump was guilty of 34 criminal felonies. That's got nothing to do with the Department of Justice.
Well, when the Department of Justice sends the number 3 guy down there to prosecute the case on behalf of the...
Which case are you referring to?
The Trump case that you just referred to.
You're talking about the District Attorney Bragg's case in New York?
The number 3 guy went down to New York.
All right, well...
Oh, and the rest of it is pretty damn good, too. I couldn't stop watching that one. It's such different, such a disparity in intelligence and ability to communicate and articulate themselves. James Comer that guy's not, I don't think he's smart. I don't know how he got to be a congressman, much less the chairman of that committee. I don't know what I'm missing. I want to do a deep dive on that guy to figure out how on earth he got to that position, because he is real stone cold stupid. And Jamie Raskin, obviously real sharp. And I pulled audio from Chris Hayes' show last night. This is just off my phone, meaning the quality is not as good, but it's just this 40 seconds. I pulled it off yesterday because I wanted to share it on Twitter, but it's 40 seconds of historian and expert on authoritarianism, Timothy Snyder, in a chilling detail about Project 2025 that I wanted to share. And this is on my Twitter feed if you want to share it with others.
So I agree. This is Project 2025 is a kind of Gleichschaltung, to use the Nazi word. It's a way of giving the executive total authority. It's a way of transforming the civil service, the backbone of the government, into a political arm, which will do whatever the aspiring dictator wants it to do. It's also it's Gleichschaltung as well, in the sense that it's meant to reach into the homes, into the family life, into the individual choices of women and everyone, to try to make us all into some kind of Christian nation as quickly as possible. It is very striking. It's all out there. I think their only defense is that it's 900 pages long, and it's, the more people read it and condense it, the harder it's going to be for them.
Very well said, Tim Snyder. That's all the headlines and audio I got for you. I'm sorry I've been slacking on the comedy clips. The comedian's been off. It's easiest to grab from their monologues, and I haven't been able to replace that. So sorry about that. I always like to end on a joke, but I've got a great conversation I want to get to right now with Sarah Posner, who's a very impressive journalist and writer. She has written in 2008, God's Prophets, Faith, Fraud, and the Republican Crusade for Values Voters, and Unholy, How White Christian Nationalism Powered the Trump Presidency and the Devastating Legacy They Left Behind. Her investigative reporting and analysis on the religious right and Republican politics has appeared in so many important news outlets, from Rolling Stone to Washington Post and New York Times and so many other places. She's a widely cited expert and frequent commentator on all kinds of shows, columnist for MSNBC, where she recently wrote about this guy, Mark Robinson, who is running for governor as Republican, and he's basically called for violence the other day. And she's got a great piece about that. We talk about that and much, much more. She is on Blue Sky, and she's got a great newsletter, The Looking Glass, which I have linked to in the show notes as everything else. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Posner is back.
Thanks for having me again, Pete. It's good to see you.
Do you think your work is more relevant than it's really ever been? You've been writing about this movement and these issues for a long time, and they seem to have taken a lot of ground, literally, physically, and congressionally.
It's true. I wish my work was irrelevant, and very few writers say that, but I think I value our democracy more than promoting my own work. I would be thrilled to be able to write about something else.
So when you see Mike Johnson in the House as House Speaker when you see this guy, Mark Robinson, as the nominee in North Carolina? You've just written this really important piece over at MSNBC.com, which I will share in the show notes. And I'm sure you can name plenty of others. Obviously, what's happened at the Supreme Court, maybe we should just take that. Any part of that, what are you seeing in terms of the actual power they've taken?
They've worked very hard for a long time at recruiting and training people to run for office and to become lawyers and to become activists. And they're really seeing the fruits of that investment that they have made over many decades to produce a speaker like Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson is somebody who worked in the trenches of the Christian right, went to law school, very much promoted the idea that Christian lawyers should be trained to advocate for biblical law, not man-made law, and worked his way up through the political ranks as well. The legal stuff was his stepping stone. And now he's Speaker of the House. And I think that this movement could not have foreseen a better outcome than perhaps him remaining Speaker of the House, Trump becoming president again, and maybe even further solidifying their control of the Supreme Court.
What do you make of the decisions made by this Supreme Court? It feels like it's a Christian nationalist Supreme Court. It feels like the decisions and the changes that Christian nationalists have been working so hard to get for, as you mentioned, years and years are actually coming to fruition. You can start wherever you want in terms of decisions. Obviously, women's reproductive rights, but now we're looking at contraception, we're looking at IVF and so on. What do you make of this term and their agenda?
I think the combination of overturning the Chevron deference and their decision in the presidential immunity case, not directly Christian nationalist cases, right? Like it's not like an abortion case or a church-state separation or school prayer case, but these decisions also have implications for how Christian nationalism will drive the next Republican president. And I say that because even if Trump doesn't win this year or doesn't become president this year, I guess I should say, that this is the blueprint for the next Republican president. The next Republican president can collude with his handpicked, non-Senate confirmed appointee at the Justice Department to stage a coup and with no consequences. So what if that appointee at the Justice Department isn't Jeffrey Clark, but is more like just a straightforward Christian nationalist? Without the Chevron deference, the executive branch can go ahead and just make regulations or overturn regulations out of whole cloth that benefit the Christian nationalist agenda. So we're really in some dangerous territory when you think about the intersection of the Supreme Court and the legislative branch should the Republicans maintain control of the House or regain control of the Senate, and should Trump be in the White House again.
The Chevron deference case, and thinking about the blueprint they've written up and promoted, Project 2025, if you just look at the section around HHS and what they would do with Health and Human Services, specifically in terms of pregnant women and keeping track of their pregnancies and so on, it's terrifying dystopian stuff. And I wonder how familiar you are with that blueprint, with that document, that 900-page document, Project 2025, and how much overlap there is with Christian nationalism and the things you and people you've been writing about for years.
Yeah, I've written about that too. It envisions a Christianization of the HHS, much along the lines that they tried to do during Trump's first term in office. Roger Severino, who's the author of the HHS section of Project 2025, was the director of the Office of Civil Rights at HHS during Trump's first term. And he pretty much tried to turn the purpose of the Office of Civil Rights on its head. the purpose of the Office of Civil Rights is to protect the civil rights of Americans, protect them from racial discrimination in accessing healthcare, sex discrimination in access to healthcare. One of the main things that they really wanted to overturn, and which they did overturn, but the Biden administration restored it, was non-discrimination regulations against trans people in accessing healthcare. So
I think a court just struck that down as well. I got to go read the headline about that. A lower court. Anyway, that doesn't make a difference. It would be struck down if Trump were to win again. But yes.
Right. So basically, he turned the Office of Civil Rights on its head by making it an office that would protect what he would term the conscience and religious liberty of Christians who object to abortion or placing foster kids with same-sex couples, or object to what he would like to call gender ideology.
Right.
They set out under his leadership to do things like try to cut off Medicare and Medicaid funding, and even other kinds of federal funding, to states that protect access to abortion or protect insurance coverage for abortion. And they have he came up with all kinds of ways to elevate the conscience and religious liberty rights, as they would call it, of conservative Christians who oppose LGBTQ and abortion rights, and who cares about the rights of other people.
It's so scary, and I'm glad you're on top of paying close attention to that. I have to go back and read more of your writing on Project 2025. And now we mentioned the House, we mentioned obviously the White House and the agenda and those supporting them. But you wrote this piece about the nominee for governor in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, and it opens with, on the Sunday before the 4th of July, North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, the Republican nominee for governor, stood on a church pulpit and called for the extrajudicial killing of people he considered to be enemies of Christian America. Republicans' continued support for and promotion of Robinson's candidacy show how the GOP and religious right have mainstreamed calls for violence in the name of Christian nationalism. Oh, that's a pleasant thought. An idea that is moving along. How have they now mainstreamed calls for violence? It used to be this kind of thing would certainly get you knocked out of a campaign or candidacy. Now it might be a strength.
Obviously, Trump played a huge role in mainstreaming talking about shooting protesters in the leg, or inciting violence against Black Lives Matter protesters, or talking about migrants as an immigrant invasion where they're coming to rape and murder your sister and your wife, right? Trump obviously played a key role in mainstreaming this. But here you have a candidate endorsed by Trump. He's the party's nominee for governor. He's the current lieutenant governor of North Carolina, which is a largely ceremonial position, but yet he is an office holder, a state office holder in North Carolina. And he said this, and I should point out that his remarks at this church were first reported by Greg Sargent at the New Republic, and my column was talking about his reporting here. And there was crickets. There was absolutely, in a prior time, you probably would have heard from Republicans saying, we do think that America was founded as a Christian nation, but we're not so sure about calling for the murder of our political adversaries. But there was nothing even remotely like that from national Republicans. In fact, the reporting on his remarks, which came around the 4th of July weekend, were completely overshadowed with endless reporting about Biden and his age and was he going to drop out. So if you think about that, first of all, the New York Times is stroking its chin about whether Biden should drop out, but not whether Trump should drop out. And here is a major party candidate for governor in a church pulpit calling for the murder of political enemies. And you heard nothing. You barely heard about it in North Carolina media.
Huge story. And so many other big stories during this time. It's being undercovered because of, as you just said, the situation with President Biden. But I'm glad we're talking about it. And that's why I wanted to have you on today, because I think it is a huge story. You write in this piece that Robinson stopped short in past instances of endorsing murder, explicitly advocating for supposed enemies of Christian America to be killed on a church pulpit, no less, is a clear and dangerous escalation of Christian nationalist support for, quote, spiritual warfare against demonic enemies. Many promoters of spiritual warfare have long insisted, citing Ephesians, is that what it is?
Ephesians. Mm-hmm.
Ephesians, that they are not talking about actual war with flesh and blood, but rather a battle against principalities and powers that takes place solely in the realm of spirituality and prayer. Yet Robinson's newly explicit calls for killing perceived enemies show just how seamlessly Christian nationalist extremists can glide into promoting real violence. Untangle that for me in terms of the spiritual warfare, the demonic enemies, and why this is an escalation.
One of the central tenets of Christian nationalism is that America was intended to be found, God intended America to be founded as a Christian nation, and it has fallen away from these Christian principles owing to secularism and abortion and gay rights and all the rest. And it's the duty of patriotic Christians to not only be engaged in the political realm in terms of going out to vote or lobbying your congressman or things like that, but it's also their duty to engage in spiritual warfare, because there are demonic enemies of America at work in the spiritual realm. And it's your duty to pray and intercede on behalf of Christians defending America against these demonic enemies of America, what Trump might call the globalists and the communists and the Marxists, which obviously is just code for Democrats. And when asked about this for many years, they say, oh, we're not actually talking about a battle, like a flesh and blood battle where knives drawn, guns drawn, although I think January 6th undercut that argument a little bit. Yeah. But this is a purely spiritual war where you're praying very hard for the vanquishing of these demonic enemies. But clearly, Robinson, who is very much admired in Christian right circles, in fact, his candidacy and his political ascendancy has been promoted by the Christian right. He has taken this in a very new and dangerous direction. And I think part of the problem here, in terms of the coverage, is that he has been saying incredibly outrageous things for such a long time that, similar to Trump, there's a little bit of this fatigue. Of course, we've already told our readers a million times about the time that he lashed out at and ridiculed the survivors of the Parkland, Florida school shooting.
That's right.
Or when he called for trans people to be arrested and thrown in jail. So how many more times can we cover it? But I think that's the issue here. I think the issue here that relates to the coverage of the over coverage of Biden's age is that the political press is in search of a new angle, right? So the old angle is that Trump is an extremist. He's in bed with the Christian nationalists, or this guy in North Carolina, is a crazy loon. We've reported those stories before. This is something new. Oh, can we talk some more about Biden? And did he walk down the steps of Air Force One too cautiously? Was he about to fall over? Whatever. And I think that's a big part of what's going on here, that the press thinks they've covered it enough already and more things don't matter.
Right. What's new is what matters, what sells, what leads, what gets
clicks. Seems new.
What seems, better said. You have to wonder about how North Carolina media is covering this. And obviously, if you want to really spin it on its head, the more extreme these candidates are, it used to be, the more likely they would be to lose. I feel like we've gotten back to that place. You mentioned this, I think, in the piece in terms of the record of endorsed candidates that have failed, that Trump endorsed candidates that have failed. You got to think that the Democrats in North Carolina are going to take all of Mark Robinson's greatest or most horrible hits and play them in an ad. And you have to wonder how the media there is covering it. And you just have to wonder if people then are familiar with just how extreme this guy is. And if, Sarah, things have remained the same, I guess it changes state to state, district to district. But in North Carolina, this guy's got to be too far for them.
You would think so. North Carolina is not Alabama, and not to suggest that he might, who knows? Would he win in Alabama? I don't know. I also haven't seen polling in North Carolina, so I don't know what the state of the race is. But I think that North Carolina, until a few years ago, I think it was considered a purplish state. I think the Biden administration, the Biden campaign thinks it might be in play. And I think it just is the sort of demographic where even if you might be, say, opposed to abortion, or even opposed to LGBTQ rights, this guy is off the rails here. Right. And I think also that his demeanor is so filled with disgust and contempt for other people that I think that's hard for a lot of voters to swallow if they see it. And I think that it's really going to be up to Dems in North Carolina to make these sort of compilation campaign ads of his, shall we call them, greatest hits.
I talk to a lot of black folks on the podcast about how race plays a factor here, and they are happy often to really be highly critical of people like Mark Robinson and so many other pundits and Ben Carson's and others who are supportive of Christian nationalists, who are overwhelmingly often cross over into white supremacy. But what would you say, if anything, about race and what issue it plays in North Carolina? Because you mentioned with this go over in Alabama, I don't know if they'd nominate a black guy.
But I think there's that too, right?
In North Carolina, I think the GOP was like, listen, he's really Christian, he's really far, but he's a black guy. And they're like, okay, that's all right, as long as he's Christian national. In Alabama, I think the same conversation would be like, nah, I think we could probably find a white guy.
I think for the Christian right, finding black candidates was definitely a priority for a long time, and especially in the Trump era, because there was so much attention on Trump being racist and being in bed with white supremacists and white nationalists, that the quest to find pro-Trump black people, and particularly pro-Trump black Christian nationalists, was a top priority. And so I think that was part of what drove his political ascent, because he was portrayed by the Christian right after his appearances at, I think it was a city council or a county council meeting. He had remarks there that went viral. And I think that they really wanted to promote him as a black candidate, promoting these very anti-trans remarks to basically say, we're not racist. We have this black guy who thinks that gender ideology is ruining America, or that gun control is ruining America, which was his other hobby horse that really made his political career take off.
You have been writing about this issue for a long time, and you've looked at the history of Supreme Court decisions as well as the movement itself. And I think I've heard you talk about and write about, if memory serves, how much of it began with school desegregation, the outrage over that. And now you see the audacity of the the Secretary of Education in Oklahoma, that guy, and of course
school superintendent.
And then in Louisiana, he said, so that guy in Oklahoma was talking about the Bible in the classroom. And of course, in Louisiana, now they got the 10 Commandments in the classrooms. The issue was schools and desegregation and taking religion out of schools and all of those issues around it. They're bringing it back. You saw this coming. What do you make of the Louisiana and Oklahoma and other states that are doing similar things? Like, they're really forcing that Christianity right into the room.
I think that the proponents of the Louisiana law, the law that requires the posting of this very particular version of the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms across Louisiana, the proponents of the law were very open about the fact that they've been watching Supreme Court precedent, and now they feel like the precedent is in place, or the precedent has been destroyed, that will give them an opening if then there has been a challenge to the Louisiana 10 Commandments law. It's in litigation now. But that if it makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, they feel pretty confident that recent decisions in their favor. And so you have to think about it in much the same way that they eventually overturned Roe, right? They kept creating laws that they knew would be challenged by the National Abortion Federation in the case of Roe, or Americans United for the Separation of Church and State in the case of these 10 Commandments laws. And their purpose is to keep trying and keep chipping away until the court finally overrules whatever the precedent is. And they did that, and that gave us Dobbs, and they did that with a series of school prayer cases. And now the precedent has basically fizzled away. There is no precedent upholding the separation of church and state in schools anymore. And so now they're hoping that they can take this case and it'll go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will say, yes, it's perfectly constitutional to require the posting of the 10 Commandments in public school. And so just like they said, it will be perfectly constitutional for the states to pass laws banning abortion. That's where we are. They know they've worked towards getting that Supreme Court. That's what I was talking about at the top, right? Like they've worked towards getting that Supreme Court precedent overturned and getting the precedent in place that will help them. And then they go back to the states and they craft a law that will survive constitutional challenge in front of this Supreme Court.
Right. Exactly what has been the plan. And it's happening. It's wild to watch. You've been covering it for a long time, written books about it. Your newsletter, The Looking Glass, you wrote, this will be the last question. I'm sorry, but I just saw this and I want to make sure I ask you about it. You wrote Pride Month is a great time to tell people how radically different Biden and Trump are. It's such an animating, divisive issue, especially around the trans issue. We lost the Board of Education over it here in my town in Rockland County, New York. But I know it's not Pride Month anymore, everybody, but I talk about LGBT equality every month of the year, Sarah. So why is it so important to talk about the differences between these two folks for the LGBT community, which you've also been writing about for a long time?
Yes. And what prompted me to write that particular post was talking to some young people, teenage kids of friends of mine and that sort of thing, who are just, their brains have been shaped by memes they've seen on Instagram or TikTok. And my friend's kid said to me, we have a choice between two dementia patients. And it just makes me really upset to hear that, because these kids are very pro LGBTQ rights, and that I'm worried that they don't get that Trump would be destructive to LGBTQ rights and Biden supports LGBTQ rights. And again, I bring us back to the Supreme Court and the deliberate destruction of precedent. And when the Supreme Court decided Obergefell, striking down bans on same-sex marriage in the states in 2015, the religious right said, they were very open about this. This was not some secret meeting or whatever. They were very open about this. Yeah. They said, this is our new Roe. We want to chip away at it until we overturn same-sex marriage. And so if you care about your queer friends, you will just swallow whatever concerns you have about Biden, whether it's his age, or you don't like this policy, or you don't like his policy on Gaza and Israel, or whatever it is, because I am telling you, Trump and his allies in the Christian right are against freedom and rights for LGBTQ people, and they will do everything in their power to eviscerate them.
It's so frustrating when I hear young people like that. My daughters are 16 and 19. I think they have a pretty good grasp on the consequences, although my 19-year-old's pretty cynical about the future and even the election right now. But man, I think I would just start lying to them at this point. I would find out whatever it is that they hold most dear, and I say, Trump is going to take that from you. Oh, you like ice cream? You like video games? Oh, that's going to be gone. Oh, yeah, they're going to ban porn, all you young teenage boys. Yeah, if that's something you like. But because it's not too far from the truth, because he is going to break your heart, take your rights, and everything that you hold dear. You just
honestly, the new platform that they've put out, they did shorten it, so it makes it much quicker to read it and to read, contrary to many of the headlines that we're seeing yesterday and today. This is not a softened GOP platform. Take a few minutes to read it.
Yeah, I haven't.
A nationalist platform
that came out yesterday. It looked like it was written in like Comic Sans font. It was a weird looking document, and apparently they didn't vote on it. Like one older Republican delegate or part of the Republican National Committee who votes on these platforms talked about in the past, both the DNC and the RNC. There's a lot of horse trading. There's a lot of negotiating. This was just apparently handed down from Magneto, or some cartoon billionaire villain or whatever, and no negotiation, no feedback, nobody gets to weigh in on it. Here it is. This is the platform, and it's bad. It's not good.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. You're so great to join me. I really appreciate you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Pete.
Yes, Sarah Posner. What do you think? Go check her out. Go subscribe to her newsletter, which you can link to in the show notes. Or I've linked to it. You can't do it, but I linked to it in the show notes. And get her books. So smart. Let her know that you heard her here. And I'm very happy that she got to join me again. Eric Siegel's a big fan of hers. I think he's the first person to turn me on to her. But another great guest joining me today. And I'll be back tomorrow with Ruth Whitman, the author of Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. Really fascinating woman and very important book, and she'll be my guest tomorrow. But I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. Subscribe now if you haven't. If for some reason you're not getting the email, let me know, and I'll send you the link to the Hangout. That is standupwithpete@gmail.com. Love you, bumblebees, and I will talk to you hopefully tonight.
I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand